May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts bring light. Amen. I am a child of the double feature. Growing up, the theater in Los Gatos had the main premiere movie, and along with it, they had the secondary movie. And the secondary movie started early, and then we had the premiere movie, the first run movie, and then the second movie would be shown again. And so when Mom and Dad and I were eating dinner, Mom would say, we need to go early so we can get a good seat. So we'd go early, and the second feature was already going on, and we'd go and sit and go through the second half of that feature, and then the first run would be shown along with cartoons and movie tone reels. And then at the end of that, the second movie would be shown in its entirety again. Now I say that because we come into the middle of the second feature. Ray read that piece from Samuel about the calling of David to be the king of Israel. And that's in the middle of the process. And so it's like going to the double feature. You have to get some idea of what's going on beforehand so you can figure out what's going on in the rest of the movie, unless you want to spend a long time, go through the other thing and come back to it again. So we'll do a little background, a little backtracking on what's been happening prior to what we heard this morning. When the people of Israel came out and crossed the Red Sea and eventually came into the Promised Land, they didn't have a king. They had judges. God was the king, and they were overseen by judges who were appointed by God. There were 12 judges. And toward the end of this period of judges, the people began to say, look, these other nations around us, they all have kings. And we want to have a king like these other nations do. And through the prophet Samuel, God said to the people, well, if you have a king, you're going to pay taxes. The king is going to lead you into battle, and you may or may not survive with your kingdom. But the people insisted, no, we want a king, we want a king. So God finally relented and told Samuel to go out and find someone who'd be suitable to be the king. And so Samuel looked around. He looked around for someone to be the king, and he found Saul. And he anointed Saul king, and that became the beginning of the united monarchy of the nation of Israel. But as we heard this morning, Saul lost favor in the eyes of God, in the eyes of Samuel. There were wars and rumors of wars, and the nation was not doing too well under Saul toward the end of his reign. And so God says, Samuel, you need to go out and find a new king. So Samuel takes up his vial of oil to anoint this king and goes to the house of Jesse, who has all these sons. I've got to say that this time it kind of sounds like Prince Charming and Cinderella, when he goes and finds the stepsisters and looks, no, it's not that one, and they finally find Cinderella. There's some piece of that in the story of Samuel finding David. So Samuel looks at these sons. He looks at the first son, and what he sees is a strong, ruddy guy. And God says, no, that's not the person. And the next one, a strong, ready guy, that must be the person. No. Goes through all of these sons. And finally, the last one comes before him. And Samuel goes, Jesse, is this your last son? And Jesse said, no. There's this child of mine, the last son. He's out in the barn with the sheep. And Samuel says, bring him. And when Samuel looks upon David, he has an insight. He looks at David, not just how he appears, but he looks into David and has an insight into this is the new king. And Samuel anoints David on the spot. So my theme for this morning is what do you see? What do you see? My wife and I are baseball fans, and for the last 20 years or so, we have been really concentrating on minor league teams. We've been in minor league teams on the East Coast and in Iowa and Illinois. If you want to see Americana, go to a minor league game in the Midwest and you'll see Americana at its very best. And Kathy and I take our scorebooks. We have these scorebooks and we have our pencils and we put down, record every play and every out and every run. And we've been doing this since our sons were playing Little League. And we have boxes and boxes and boxes of all these scorebooks over the last 40 years. And they're someplace in the garage and I can't bear to get rid of them. So I told her daughter, well, when we pass on, you can do whatever you want with the scorebooks, but we're not going to get rid of them yet. So Kathy and I went to a San Jose Giants game, and they're a minor league team for the San Francisco Giants. And the minor leagues are where professional baseball players get their start. They go through the minor league system and they train and they get better and better, and they'll be called up to the major leagues to play for the first string teams. So we went to the San Jose Giants game in the spring of 2009. And I had my scorebook and I was keeping score. And I happened to look at the catcher. They had a new catcher. And I watched him move about 5 or 6 innings. And at the end, maybe in the 7th inning, I had my pencil and his name was there. And I said, this guy is the real deal. I had an insight into this catcher, his grace, the way he handles himself behind the plate. His batting swing is just as smooth and powerful as you can imagine. This is the real deal. And 18 months later, Buster Posey led the San Francisco Giants to their first World Series that they had ever had while they were in San Francisco, and led them to 2 others over the next 5 years. He was the real deal. And I got that through an insight. So it just shows what you see is one thing, but when you get beyond that sight and you see other qualities that you don't just see automatically. So my question this morning is what do you see? What do you see? I came here on Wednesday and met Sharon and Ray and Steve, and Ray and I went out to lunch. And I came in for the first time, like looking around the parish hall here, and I say, well, it's a parish hall. I've seen a lot of parish halls in my life, and I went over, and Ray took me through the church, and that's a Bishop Nichols building, and it was built in the same style as the buildings that Bishop Kipp built all up and down the state of California. And yeah, it looked familiar, but you see it with different eyes. When you come into this parish hall, you see a lot more than just what your eyes give you. You see the people who have been here over the years. You see receptions here for folks who are beloved to you. You've had that experience in this place. When you go into the church and you look into that redwood, you don't only see the redwood, you see everything that's behind it. You see the Christmas Eves and the Easters and the Palm Sundays. You see the weddings and baptisms and funerals, and all of that gives you insight into this community. Insight into the community. And we've been in this COVID routine now for just about 1.5 years. And we haven't had much chance to see things. We've been in mandatory lockdown for part of that, and we haven't been able to see. But on those occasions when we have, I've begun to see and change the way I look at people and the way I experience people. In the midst of that lockdown, I would go grocery shopping on Mondays and Fridays. And when I started doing that, it was very transactional. Put the groceries out, pay the bill, take them to the car. But as the months progressed, I began to look at that checker who was there every day with a mask on, an essential worker putting their life out on the line for us. And I began to see them with different lights. And the first thing I did, I noticed their name. Now, I'd always been polite to folks before, but I noticed their name and I called them by name. And I said, I'm really grateful for you being here. And suddenly that relationship moved from the transactional, you take care of the groceries, I'll pay you and I'll leave, to relational, in that place of gratitude. So I'm really grateful for you being here. And the response was one of thank you. And this isn't just for grocery workers, but it's all for those essential folks that have brought us through the last year and a half. And now we're at a place where we're beginning to come out of the cocoon. We're about ready to come out and see things again and have relationships again. And my question for you is what are you going to see? In the last year and a half, your eyes have changed. What you see has changed. And you're going to see things as you begin to reestablish relationship with the world. You're going to see things in a different way. And so I encourage you in the weeks that are coming to look as you see, and just don't see on the level, but look deeper. How have you changed over this year and a half? How do you see differently? Now, I'm also a child of the serial generation, where we went to the Los Gatos Cinema on Saturday afternoons, and there was a movie of some type, and they'd stop it just when the cowboy was jumping off the horse or whatever was happening. And then we'd come back next week. So next week, the serial is going to continue because we're picking up where we left off today and finding the next episode in this wonderful, wonderful story of the people of Israel and how they lived together some 3,000 years ago.